Hello again, everybody. Lance Russell and Dave Brown right along ringside. By golly, we're about ready to go with more big action.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Georgia Championship Wrestling. I'm Gordon Solie, your host, and we have quite an hour in store for us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Championship Wrestling at ringside. This is Vince McMahon, along with wrestling's only living legend, Bruno Sammartino.
Welcome to this week's edition of Mid-South Wrestling Television. I'm your host, Boyd Pierce, another outstanding card.
Hey, guys, and welcome back to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories. I am Ray Russell, and this week we dive back into the old LeBell territory, going back to Los Angeles yet again. Last time out, our special guest for this project, well, he set the stage. We talked a lot about what was going on when he was a fan back in the 1970s. The ups and the downs, some of the fun gimmicks and some of the not so fun. Well, they were all fun, let's be honest, but some of them not so successful. How about that? And this week, we're going to dive into what we promised you guys. We're going to talk about the dying days of the Los Angeles territory circa the early 1980s. Going to jump into 1980 here this week with my very special guest. Please welcome back to the program, the one and only, some people know him as Kurt Brown, but here in the wrestling world, we know him as Vandal Drummond. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me once again as I give a toast with my cup of Keurig Irish breakfast tea. I know just before we went on air, we were talking drinks. Yes. I feel quite refined and ready to talk about 1980 Los Angeles territory wrestling.
As long as that pinky finger's in the air, honor Lord Alfred Hayes, and we'll get rolling here. Absolutely, man. It's great to have you back on the show.
Exactly. Thank you. And if only I had a voice that was more akin to Lord Alfred Hayes than Bob Goldthwait's less successful brother. I was never known for my voice.
That wasn't really bad. That wasn't bad at all. That was pretty close right now.
Thank you.
This is special report with Lord Alfred. No, we're back in 1980 LA, guys, as promised. So we set the stage last time around. We had you on. You talked about the ups and downs of the 1970s, some of the fun and interesting gimmicks that maybe came with the bionic arm, Lars Anderson, and things of that nature. And we're going to run into some more gimmicks and things as we go along here into the early 80s. We discussed the dying days of the LeBell territory in Los Angeles, 1980. Now, before we got rolling, I said, hey, man, throw me some bullet points. I want to make sure I tackle anything you really want to discuss. So I do have things bolded and highlighted here in my notes as we get there. And I thought every once in a while, as I scroll through the results talking to you this week, I might run down an entire card for one of the random weeks and just kind of hit on a lot of the talent so we don't miss anybody.
Absolutely.
So we get going. We're coming out of 1979, 1980, getting ready to elect Ronald Reagan as president later this year. But before we get there, we're going to have a whole lot of wrestling going on here. And I figured if we're going to run down a show, why not start off at the beginning of the year, January 9th, Los Angeles, of course, Grand Olympic Auditorium. And some of the talent here, a lot of people may know the name Al Madril, who worked in Portland, worked all over, really.
Absolutely.
But Al was a hell of a talent, worked from the 70s and through the 80s. And story goes, later on, he was discovered, perhaps, I think it was like in an auto body shop or something, and he claimed he was not Al Madril, although people seemed to find out that he was. So last I heard, he wanted nothing to do with the wrestling business. Have you heard anything about Al in the recent years?
I heard that exact same story, and then that must have been like 7 or 8 years ago. And then a few years ago, I heard kind of an about face where he, I don't know if he looked up somebody or ran into a fan/historian, which was something the Al Madril I remember didn't like doing. At the arenas, he was a great baby face, but when he had to mingle with the crowds for too long, he did not look pleased. He could have been he could have been a little better. The other baby faces like Tom Prichard, the Guerreros were a lot more good about that stuff. Were excellent in that role. Like I said, in the ring, Madril was a masterful baby face. But there was a section of people, at least at the San Bernardino arena, that would it was like the poor Aruda crowd just booing the hell out of him just because he could be kind of a dick to people.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I heard he I don't know if he looked up somebody or just ran into somebody, but he did say he was Al Madril and he is interested if people had any paraphernalia tapes or anything. So,
oh, very cool.
Which is not uncommon. I've known a couple guys like either local boys or journeymen who they get very burned out on the business. And I knew of one who Superboy's father, El Moro, was in the process of throwing out all his photo albums and everything. And,
oh, wow.
When he was like in his late 40s. Fortunately, Superboy saw his dad in the act of doing it, was screaming, "What the hell are you doing, Dad?" And his dad said, "That's the past. What's now is now." And I'm so glad Superboy did that, because that was like over 30 years ago, before we were using our phones for photos. But sure. I was able to get a lot of those old photographs, and I had new negatives made of them. So who knows? Madril might have had several change of hearts. I'd be curious to know what his story is.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. I didn't get to see a lot of Al Madril until later on during the tape trading years for me in the 1990s, but seeing him in Portland, seeing him in Dallas, seeing him work, in the random territories, I was a fan. But I was very taken aback, because a lot of what I saw of him was a babyface, but then I got to the Fiesta Garden, if you will, with Al Madril and some of those type of things. And so I was very shocked, taken aback at how well he played the heel. But according to you, maybe a natural heel. Maybe that's why he played it so well.
Maybe that was very cathartic for him, and I am guilty. People have told me I gotta look up his run as a heel in the Northwest.
Oh,
I have yet to do that, and I've been told that it is well worth going out of your way. I heard he was excellent in that role.
Yeah, he was one of the shining spots during, the dying days of Portland. I know it stuck around for a while after that, but when a lot of the talent was gone, pillaged away for the big time, he was one of the shining spots for sure. I really enjoyed his talk segments.
I was in that camp when I was 17 and going occasionally to the Olympic, but mostly to San Bernardino. I was in that camp where he annoyed the shit out of me just because he was so brilliant as a babyface in the ring and just looked like he wanted to be anywhere else when he was in the lobby.
Oh.
And I can understand the predicament, because once the few times I wrestled at San Bernardino, the dressing room is tiny. So the only place you can really hang out, and have a breath of fresh air is the lobby where all the fans are.
Right. So you kind of felt that even back then as a younger fella, as far as you read the room in regards to Al Madril. But in the ring, there, he was a hell of a talent. So it's very cool to see
awesome.
that he was still here in Los Angeles, making ends meet. And he would go on again after this. He would wind up in Dallas, at least through the end of 82, I believe. And then they kind of shift bookers and whatnot. Gary Hart's out, and obviously Ken Mantell's in. We'll talk a little bit about a Mantell here in a few minutes as well. But here on the beginning of 1980, Al Madril scores a win over El Adonis de Zacatecas, El Bengali. What a mainstay. Tell everybody a little bit about Bengali here in Los Angeles.
Bengali was somebody who, from Zacatecas, that's where he hailed from, but he's somebody who was part of the local boy scene since early 70s. I remember he was enhancement talent on Los Angeles TV when I was a little kid.
Wow.
And I even remember a couple of times, I remember twice him going over. LeBell was interesting in that effect, where you'd have these guys jobbing all the time, but once in a while it'd give you a little surprise.
Right.
I remember with him and a guy who, he was a Japanese wrestler, I can't remember his name, who also was usually enhancement talent. But I was shocked because they went over Raul Reyes and another wrestler whose name escapes me at the time. But I was shocked that the enhancement went over. But that was part of the fun of the LeBell territory.
Keeping you on your toes. You never know.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that.
He was also wrestled under a hood as the White Terror for the lucha scene here.
Okay.
He was part of the Hadco Plaza scene. And I remember my very first match in 1983, I was assigned to the heel dressing room, and the first person I saw was Bengali. He knew I was new, so he's trying to intimidate me, not in a mean way, but in a way looking me up and down like, oh, this young man looks delicious. And I'm just there stammering like Jackie Gleason in The Honeymooners, like, Bengali, oh my God, it's an honor to meet you.
Right. Well, he had been in L.A. for a good decade by this point. I think I did research on him many years ago because I was just infatuated. Who was this guy that popped up in results every year of L.A. I ever looked into, right? And so from what I remember, he was, like you said, from Zacatecas, and I think he broke in Mexico, but he didn't spend very long there, like about a year or so. And then he goes to LA and he's there for the entire duration of the 70s, all the way here into the beginning of the 1980s. So he's been here a long time. He's a mainstay.
Yeah, there were a number of guys like that. He was one of those guys when he moved to California, that became home. He had a family here, a very, very handsome guy, popular with women. The Adonis de Zacatecas was not just a handle. He owned a barber shop up until his passing just a few years ago.
Oh,
yeah, he made it into his 80s. Sadly, I'm not certain of this, but he got sick right around when COVID came along, and it was before it really hit, but several of us suspect that might have been what took him.
Right.
But he was a big part of the LA scene for years. I got to introduce him at Cauliflower Alley in 2008, and to me that was a really big honor.
So I'm going to run over a couple of matches here because I got a couple questions for you. Maybe you have answers, maybe you don't, but I'm just curious here. So a couple more matches on the card. Jack Evans, not the recent wrestler Jack Evans, but the original Jack Evans in the professional wrestling world, Dynamite Jack Evans, if you will, scores a win over a guy by the name of Mr. Mexico. And also we have a match with the masked Hood, the Hood, and he's going to score a win over El Negro. And so we've got a lot of masked wrestlers in these two matches, and we're going to get back to the Evans brothers in just a little bit. So we're going to ignore Jack Evans being involved so far. But I want to talk to you about these other three masked men. If the Hood was, if I'm not mistaken, John Mantell, the brother of Ken Mantell, the Lusk brothers.
John Mantell, and he was from right here in Chino, California. Mm-hmm. Both he and Ken Lusk were California boys. Ken, I don't know about Johnny, but Ken Lusk was a decorated amateur wrestler in the city of Chino. And John Mantell's arrival as the Hood was brilliant because I can't remember if Piper had just been in town, but we all remember Piper's run as the Canadian, and fans knowing it was him and starting to chant his name. Well, the Hood did all the Piper mannerisms when he arrived.
Wow. Okay.
And it was great. Like, I was at San Bernardino one night. I can't remember if it was a really well-drawn card. It might have been the Battle Royal card in San Bernardino. Because in addition to the LA Battle Royal, every small town had a Battle Royal too.
Okay.
And to open up the year. And I remember it was a really big crowd, a hot crowd, and he would do a little Piper mannerism, and the fans would just start chanting, "Piper, Piper," and he would start waving his hands and shaking his head. No, I'm not him.
That's brilliant.
And they didn't do it as an angle or anything. They were just messing with our heads for maybe 3-4 weeks. I thought it was great. I really do wish they actually did an angle with it, but maybe they were just having fun.
That's a great way to keep people thinking and guessing, not just, to confuse the fans, but also to keep them coming. Like, they think they're still paying to see Roddy. We got John Mantell out here doing.
And Mantell was a really good worker, in my opinion.
Yeah, he was. I didn't get to see a lot of him until very late in his career, like when he was doing Global and whatnot, right? So he had already seen better days.
Yeah.
But going back and being able to see the footage that's out there of the Hood and just some of the early John Mantell stuff, I totally agree. His brother was amazing in the 70s, and obviously he gets a lot of credit as a booker in the 80s. But I've watched a lot of recently on one of my video casts, we've been covering a lot of the All Japan, and watching Ken Mantell over there in All Japan has been amazing in the mid-70s. So, yeah.
I've never seen Ken Mantell in Japan, and I would very much like to. He was here in L.A. from, I want to say, fall of 1976 to early 1977. And he did the angle where he gets his head shaved in a hair versus hair match.
He loved that angle, huh?
And so he walks around with Ken Mantell for about a month afterwards. He had a wig on But instead of doing the angle that a lot of wrestlers like Buddy Rose did in Northwest, where you put a mask on to disguise your bald head, he put Olympic headgear on over a really bad wig. And it was hysterical because he was also doing the heel commentary alongside Gene LeBell. And while Gene LeBell was usually not that fun to watch as an announcer, he and Ken Mantell had a great chemistry. He would always be teasing Ken Mantell about how lame the wig he bought was. And Mantell would scream, you better watch what you're saying. And Gene LeBell, who probably could have taken Ken Mantell in a fight, did his usual thing where he's feigning fear of Ken Martell, like, well, I'm really glad we're almost out of time because I think Ken Mantell's angry at me. Wow!
Yowza.
Yeah, that was...
I love the over-the-top. Ken Mantell would do the old head gimmick again. Not the, I don't know about the wig and everything, but he did that with Paul Orndorff, the hair versus hair for Bill Watts, I believe, in the Mid-South. That's how the Freebirds got a hold of the hair cream, if I'm not mistaken, in fact. But,
I'd like to watch more of that, actually.
Yeah, I wish more of it was out there.
Johnny Mantell was really good, but Johnny Mantell, in my opinion, was better as a supporting player, where Ken Mantell was top-notch.
Yeah. He was great over, like I said, you haven't seen anything of him over in Japan. We'll make that happen for you because there's some really, really good stuff over there.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. So,
thank you. I've been a big fan of his.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. He was a guy that just kind of got lost in time to me. I got to see him a little bit in the early 80s Dallas stuff. Wasn't really impressed, but again, that wasn't really what he was coming in for, right? So he wasn't really, I don't think his heart was in it. I don't think he was performing at the level he did in the 70s. And so I haven't, now that I've seen a lot.
Toward the end of his career.
Yeah.
And I know he was in the booking. He had to run things in the booking office too in Dallas, if I remember correctly.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You're wearing several hats. And I think the smartest bookers didn't put themselves too high on the card.
Right. And he did not. And he took himself out as fast as he could as well. He was smart.
That's smart.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got another couple other masked guys involved in these matches. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not, but I just wanted to go over the names real quick, just in case. El Negro, for all intents and purposes, everything I could find, and obviously it's a very generic name, the Black, translates to the Black. The Black what? I always wondered whenever I would see a job guy use that name on TBS or something. But this one, supposedly, it was a guy by the name of Dario Romero. Do you remember anybody under that name?
I remember Dario well. I knew him a little bit when I was starting in the indie scene in the early 80s. He was the legit brother of Ricky Romero.
Oh, really?
Uncle of the rest of the Romeros as well, obviously. He was never a strong worker. They had another brother who was enhancement talent here, the Oregon Lumberjack, who was a big, beefy guy under a mask.
I remember doing research on him before.
He was a pretty decent worker. El Negro wasn't a great worker, but boy, was he a nice guy. Really nice guy. We lost him just 1 year ago.
Really?
He was in his 80s. He got pneumonia, but up until then, boy, he was in fantastic shape.
Wow.
I last saw him at one of the wrestling conventions in Los Angeles around 2012. Very nice guy. Took really good care of himself.
In this position here in LA, he was an underneath guy or a mid-card type talent?
Very underneath.
Okay.
I think once in the blue moon, he would go over and, to be honest, that probably wasn't that convincing. I'm not trying to talk shit about him. He just wasn't a strong worker.
Yeah, I totally get you.
But he was reliable. He showed up, so that's the game.
Mr. Mexico. I can only find one Mr. Mexico that competed in the LA circuit. A guy by the name of George de la Isla. Do you know anybody? Do you remember Mr. Mexico?
George de la Isla, who I actually knew when he lived here in California. He actually was from my hometown in Fullerton. Not from, but that's where he lived. Was a local paramedic. And he was a very nice guy. I know he did some promoting too. I know this is getting to be a bit of a requiem type of show, but he just passed a few months ago. He had moved back to Texas. I think his wife passed away not too long ago. He had a lot of health problems. He was a good hand in the ring. He was a good jobber. Sometimes he would go over, but he was better in the enhancement role.
I got you. Well, they make it to the Grand Olympics, so they must have some form of talent to put them out there in front of the fans, I suppose. Let's see what we got.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like some of the guys are playing double duty. We've got Al Madril back out here a second time, defeating one of the Twin Devils, who also work a tag team match here. And I see it's our Mando Guerrero of the famous Fighting Guerrero family, and partner Chief Running Hill. We'll get back to him in a moment. They defeat the Twin Devils 1 and 2, uno and dos, if you will. Chief Running Hill would go on just not too long after this to become Jules Strongbow in the WWF. And but it's fun to see him get a run out here on the West Coast with Mando as his partner in this particular match, scoring a win over the Twin Devils. Anything you want to share about any of those guys?
I love the Twin Devils. They arrived here late in 1978. I loved them right away because they were just the classic luchador heels. Twin brothers, and they just had those great silent movie expressions where they were great on the mic, but you didn't even have to hand them a microphone. They just did all this pantomime stuff to the crowd, and they were so effective. They did the awesome spot where one of them would get tossed out of the ring when they were getting their lunch fed to him. The other twin would put his arms around them. They'd spin in circles a few times, and then the wrong guy would enter back into the tag match.
I love it.
And Miguel Alonso, the Spanish commentator on Channel 34, he'd be speaking rapidly in Spanish, and when they'd do that, he'd scream, "Sweets! Sweets!"
Well, see, I got to watch that as a kid, but it was the Conquistadors doing those type of things, and they didn't get to do that very often, but I did see them do that. So, but it's cool.
Yeah, Devils were one of my favorites at that. Everybody who knows me knows my all-time favorite tag team was Gordman and Goliath.
Right.
But Twin Devils were up there in my book too, and I mean they were very over in Mexico.
So I wasn't very impressed once I started renting Coliseum videos later in the 80s, watching the Strongbows in the ring. Wasn't impressed with the over-the-hill Chief J, but also equally unimpressed with Jules Strongbow. Odd choice, but I guess he had done the Native American character long enough that they said, bring him in, Frank Hill. And I think he was working maybe for McGurk, which went out of business right around that time. Tri-States, they were trying to compete with Bill still, I believe. And so he winds up in the WWF as Jules Strongbow. But what are your memories here in 1980 or 79 or whenever he came in here to LA? Do you remember Chief Running Hill in the LA territory?
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say I actually interviewed him, but never used the interview. I can't remember why I didn't get it up to the magazine, but he's a very friendly guy.
Okay.
I mean, he was a good worker, but not a great worker.
Right.
Good babyface. I think he was in LA at a good time for him to get that sort of push, because LA was really turning from decent talent to whatever they could get. I think I remember in Rock Rim's book on Los Angeles wrestling that the spoiler came in, Don Jardine, in the middle of the year, and as soon as he got to LA, he said, "Hey, I can't live on this salary you're giving me," so he just split. And if I remember right, that's why they gave Ron Starr the Spoiler Star name. LeBell did silly stuff like that. Instead of just why not just pretend he never arrived? They did the same thing with Luis Mariscal in 1982 when he came to LA, but under the name Sweet Brown Sugar, because apparently Skip Young was supposed to come in, but I guess maybe he heard about the wonderful paydays they were giving and decided to stay home. So instead of just pretending like he was never there, they billed Luis Mariscal as Sweet Brown Sugar, which didn't make a hell of a lot of sense.
Wow, you just solved a 20-plus year mystery. I've been wondering why he was called Sweet Brown Sugar for over 20 years, why Luis Mariscal was given that gimmick, and you're saying because Skip Young.
The Latino fans all knew who Luis Mariscal was. If you went to downtown LA, there were at least 3 weekly Lucha Libre magazines you could buy. So a lot of times LeBell would do some sort of a gimmick with wrestlers coming in from Mexico, and some of the Mexican fans would laugh and just say, like, what are they talking about? Oh, I remember, this is a good example. When they brought in the Twin Devils, they just brought one Twin Devil in.
Oh.
And fans would go up and ask people like Jeff Walton and stuff, hey, where's the other Twin Devil? And, he'd go, oh, gee, I think there's only one Twin Devil. No, there's just one. And, of course, what they're working up to is when the Twin Devil is getting his butt kicked, another Twin Devil comes out there. In fact, I think it was with Pedro Morales for the America's title. Another Twin Devil runs out and takes his brother's place, wins the match, and then next Wednesday on TV, Pedro Morales is saying, I'm not crazy. I saw two Twin Devils. And all the fans would go up to the other babyface wrestlers like Walton and people like that with their Lucha Libre mag saying, yeah, look, here's photos of both Twin Devils in Mexico.
Damn Lucha
and
mags.
They would just, yeah. The funniest reaction I heard was I had a friend, a guy named Nick Hannock, who went up to Hector Guerrero when they were still insisting there was only one Twin Devil. Mm-hmm. And he showed Hector Guerrero the photo. Like, I thought you said there was only one Twin Devil. And Hector Guerrero looked at it, and he could tell Hector Guerrero was trying to think of something to say and said, well, if you look very closely, they're both the same guy. They use trick photography.
Well, there you go. Thinking, Hector.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the funny things about the Los Angeles territory I've learned in recent years is while, wrestlers, and wrestling generally believed in kayfabe, I think LA was one territory where they really thought you could fool everybody all of the time.
Oh, okay.
They thought no matter how outlandish the gimmick or the angle or storyline was, that everybody would buy it.
Well, according to your story about Walton coming out and go, everybody step away, and out comes the monster. Apparently so. And I can't wait till we get there because we can, cover the entire story.
1981 was a grand year.
I bet there was air quotes around that, but I'm looking forward to it anyway. So we've got one more match here on the January 9th show, and I wanted to, this is a fun team for me. Jack Evans, Dynamite Jack Evans, in some circles, he teamed a lot in the New York area with Pretty Boy Larry Sharp, but also Ray Evans, Bomber Ray Evans, and would go on to be Lance Idol later on, I do believe. But here they are, the Evans brothers, Jack and Ray Evans, scoring a win over El Negro and Mr. Mexico, out to do a job again, this time as a tag team. But in your bullet points, you said you definitely wanted to hit on the matches between the Evans brothers and the Guerreros, a feud that they had. So I figured, why not discuss it right now?
When you push somebody like Jack Evans, who was either middle of the card or enhancement talent in WWF, and they get put over on top in LA, a lot of reactions I would hear from, the fans who read the bulletins, the smart fans,
right,
saying, oh man, they're pushing him. Oh, they must be desperate. But even if it was 5 years earlier, I think they could have given him a push. That was something I did like about the LA territory. They would sometimes push people who normally were just a face in the crowd somewhere. Right. The two examples that come to mind, I think people back east from the 70s remember Joe Nova, who was Butcher Brannigan both here in California and in Australia. He wasn't a great wrestler, but he looked like a tough guy. Like, he looked really badass.
Right.
And he was really good on the mic. He was very effective. I don't think they ever gave him like the America strap, but he did have more than just a minor push. And the other example was in 1976, Fabulous Frank Monte, who I thought was really underrated. He's somebody who was a curtain jerker most of the places he went, but he came in as a bleached blonde heel, and he had the gimmick where he carried a stretcher everywhere with him and would.
Oh, really? Okay.
I can't remember what move. I can't remember if it was the pile driver or something, but his specialty was the Sicilian stretcher match where the loser gets carried out on the stretcher.
Oh, he was in good shape. He had that look, especially when he was doing the blonde gimmick and whatnot, the Fabulous Frank Monte.
I enjoyed him a lot.
I was always curious why he didn't get more of a push, but he did over there on the West Coast.
He did. Well, possibly it might be you never know. It might be what was the situation with Raul Mata when he went to Florida. He got a little push. You knew it wouldn't be a major push, but he met his wife and decided to settle down. And when you're going to stay in one place, you're kind of signing yourself up for enhancement talent, with nothing wrong with that. It's a good payday still. That might be the case with Frank Monte. He might have wanted to stay close to home. I remember Mickey Doyle saying that's why the Hippies tag team with Mike Boyette never went far, because every time they'd go to a territory, Mike Boyette would get homesick and want to go back to,
Man, that's a shame.
Was it Tennessee or Kentucky?
Those guys were money.
To see the Hippies.
100%. Those guys were money.
Yeah. I'm so glad that there's footage of Mickey Doyle in Japan versus Jumbo Tsuruta where he's wearing the hippie gear.
Yeah.
You know, people who want to really appreciate Mickey Doyle. Mickey Doyle was a great worker, and seeing that match with Tsuruta is a good display of his workmanship.
He's going to pop up somewhere here under the hood as Piel Blanco, if I remember correctly, or somewhere in the early.
Which, if you look up that, it means white skin.
White skin. Okay, I didn't know. I knew the
That's
Blanco.
White skin.
All right, very good. He's coming up sooner or later, no doubt about it. So I look at that card, though, and
I want to say one of the nicest people not just nicest people, but one of the most down-to-earth people I've ever met, Mickey Doyle.
Awesome. I don't know him obviously personally, but he's very awesome. You know, he's a Facebook friend of mine, and, you know, he likes some of the things I post, and, you know, he's always adding, you know, anything he can to just kind of share in the history of the business. So I really appreciate him.
I don't have a lot of things I like to brag about, but I met him when I worked on a show in Hawaiian Gardens in '83. And I don't think he'd been working for about the last year. And, you know, he worked full time at the post office. And I met him that night. And then about 2 months later, I get a phone call and he says, "Yeah, is this Kurt?" And I'm going, "Yeah." He goes, "Yeah, this is Mickey Doyle. I saw you wrestle, on Carl Lauer's show No, it wasn't Carl Lauer's, it was Pistol Pete's show. And Pete said you might be interested in working out with somebody." I'm going, do you want to work out with me? And he says, "Yeah, I'm going to get back in it part-time," because he was doing shots when WWF would come into L.A. in 1984. And so I was just gobsmacked that I guess I looked better than some of the other rookies in the ring that night. Well, this isn't bragging, but I know I was. That's not patting myself on the back. It's speaking to some of the lack of talent of some of the rookies we had.
So he was least likely to get hurt. Working out with you is what it was.
Yeah.
I get it. I totally get it.
So what I got several lessons from Mickey Doyle where God damn, in those 3 lessons, I think it was, I learned a lot from him. He was a really good teacher. He went on to train a number of people. I think he trained Rhino. I think he had something to do with Al Snow's training.
Okay.
But yeah, I keep in touch with him from time to time. You couldn't meet a nicer guy.
I know he teamed with Al at some point.
And a genuine nicer guy.
Yeah, he seems very cool as far as everything I can tell online anyway. But so I don't want to go completely off track, though. I hit you up for the story, the backstory, or your memories of this feud here with the Guerreros.
Poor guy. I'm stream of consciousness.
No, please.
I'm such a stream of consciousness type.
And I also
want to apologize by my stammering, the way I'm always going, ah.
No, man. Anytime you have a story to tell, I mean, I have my notes in front of me, so we can't. Hey, I awesome. Interview. I do a show with Bob Roop every week, so I know how to stay on topic, or at least come back to the topic after X amount of time. So, because he can ramble from time. Yeah. He'll self-admittedly tell you that he can ramble or go way off the beaded paths. But I want to go back here.
The structure of my writing of my style of writing is a lot better than the structure of my voice.
Oh, very good. So Hector Guerrero doesn't appear to be here in 1980, but we do have Mando and we do have Chavo Guerrero. So I'm assuming they're the two Guerreros involved in this feud. Tell us a little bit about your memories of the Guerreros working with Jack and Ray Evans.
Well, there was an angle which unfortunately I was not there for, that they did the Olympic, where the Evans brothers break Mondo's arm. And in a year that was kind of had a few bright spots but was rather dead, I had a friend who was there who said it was just an amazing piece of work from both Mando and Chavo. They break Mondo's arm, and Mondo's selling it, I guess, beautifully. Like, you would swear he was in dire pain. Mm-hmm. Chavo runs out and I guess clears the ring and is just looking enraged. And I guess it was a upward sliding door at the back of the arena, and they actually pulled an ambulance back, and Chavo sold it like his brother was killed. I remember in some of the other towns like San Bernardino, they would do an angle where Mando was there wearing, his arm in a sling.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I remember I had brought a friend who had never been to a wrestling match before, and they did an angle where Mando and Carlos Mata were supposed to have a title shot against the Evans brothers. And, the angle is Carlos Mata should be able to choose a replacement, but the Evans says, no, it's scheduled to be you and Mando. It's you guys are nobody. And I remember the manager, Pete Collins, is grabbing the mic and saying, you did this terrible thing to Mando, and now you're too cowardly to defend your titles. And right in the middle of Pete Collins' rant, they attack Mando and trash his arm again. And, well, again, Mando was spectacular in that role because the gal I took to the matches, she was like really upset. It came off very real to her. And I want to say Ray Evans was a guy named Steve Schumann. And like you said, he later was Lance Idol.
Mm-hmm.
He was so talented. Very talented, but very self-destructive from what I understand.
Yeah, I saw how he passed away, so I kind of got that hint. But there's some footage of him out there. It would be later on in the end of the 80s, maybe 89-ish or so, of him in Puerto Rico doing the Lance Idol gimmick, being able to cut a promo and just kind of getting pushed near the top for the time he was there on the tour. He was there for however many months. And I was like, who? And this is, going back 25 years ago, I saw the footage. And who is this guy? Because, he'd never really made it big, right? And so I'm like, why is this guy, why did he never work any of the major territories? Why was he never, and I'm wondering if he was his own worst enemy in that situation.
He was, I remember in LA, he got injured. I remember being there when he was wrestling Tom Prichard, and he was thrown to the rope, and the rope just snapped, and he fell backwards on his head.
Ugh.
And he was carted out. And all the fans seemed to think it was an angle, but
okay.
You could tell by the look on Pritchard's face, like, no, this wasn't supposed to happen.
And Tom's green, right? Tom's like, I don't know what's going on here.
Oh, in fact, I felt bad for him because he got back in the ring like 10 minutes later, and I remember the last match that they had that night. They worked with only the bottom two ropes.
Right.
They weren't able to fix it, but I remember Prichard comes in the ring and grabs the mic and says, hey, listen, Ray Evans and I, we're not friends, but I feel really bad about what happened. I hope he's okay. And the fans are cheering like crazy. And you could just tell he's like a deer in the headlights. Like, what the fuck is wrong with these people?
They're wrestling fans, man. Come on.
They're wrestling fans, and it means Ray was a good heel.
Right.
The next time I saw him was 2 years later, when he was wrestling for Ripper Leone in Bakersfield, and he was even better by then. I remember my friend Tom Hankins, who I want to give a shout out with, who just recently passed away. Very dear friend, the first guy who ever got me in the ring, but somebody I loved a lot.
Tom Hankins passed away?
Yeah, he passed away not too long ago.
Oh, my God, I didn't know that. Yeah, I used to talk with him. Oh, my God. I'm terrible to hear that.
His wife passed away. Wife passed away about a year ago, and I think that was kind of it for him. He wasn't suicidal or anything, but I think he just kind of lost interest.
Got it.
Yeah, but he was a really good guy. But he actually went up to Ray Evans and said, "Oh my gosh, I thought I was watching Ray Stevens earlier," and he said Ray Evans just looked like a kid on Christmas Day, and just said, "Oh my God, thanks, that's my ultimate hero." So he was definitely a Northern California boy whose hero was Ray Stevens.
Oh man, that's terrible to hear. I wasn't even aware. I don't know how I missed that, man.
Yeah,
Sorry to hear that.
It's been a good 2 months, and I want to say a farewell to my dear friend Tom Hankins, a.k.a. Crazy Charlie Reed, a.k.a. Mad Dog Steel Graham.
There you go. Yeah, that's unfortunate. Oh, man. Well, I mean, man, we got to get back on So you were telling the story of Jack and Ray Evans feuding with the Guerreros, breaking Mando's arm. It was Mando's arm, right? And Chavo selling it huge as far as, oh my God, you've basically almost killed my brother. And then they work over the arm again.
My brother.
They work over the arm again to get even more heat, apparently. So they had a scheduled match. Obviously, the match doesn't take place. What happens beyond that?
They just went on with the show. That was the best part. It was like a match unto itself. And when they were helping Mando out of the ring, at one point he just screams at the top of his lungs like his arm moved the wrong way. And to me, it was just great workmanship. But being there with somebody who had never seen a professional wrestling show before and seeing how upset she was about it, I was like, wow, this is great workmanship.
So did you break kayfabe and let her in? Or did you just...
Oh, yeah. I know everybody probably hate me for that back then, but I said, nah, don't worry. He's okay.
Oh, man. Come on, guys. I got to take her. I got to take her home later. I got to put her in a good mood, right? So...
That's right. No, she was just my buddy.
Oh, that's still cool though, man. I totally get the confidence thing as far as kayfabe, but that was, you did the right thing, I think. Nowadays we can certainly look back and say you did. Don't want to leave anybody traumatized. So, oh man,
yeah.
So I'm assuming there was a payoff. Eventually, the Guerreros return, or is everybody still in the territory long enough to have a payoff to this storyline, or what happens after the arm injury?
I have to confess ignorance here, because I think that was the first year when I wasn't following it as closely as I had before.
Okay.
Up to 1979, no matter how great or how lame the storylines were, I was following the product. But
gotcha.
I think, the production of the TV show was not nearly what it was, even just let alone the wrestling itself. It didn't have that same pizzazz. And you could talk to a lot of people I know people who became wrestling fans in 1980 and have great memories. But for me, it was like the beginning of the end.
And it was the beginning of the end.
It was the beginning of the end. Also, that summer, I took a trip back east and just kind of, vagabonded around. And I went to my first WFIA convention in Georgia, where the Ole's Turn on Dusty took place. So and then after that, in late August, I moved up to Oregon, where I discovered Playboy Buddy Rose and Pacific Northwest Wrestling.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of kind of blank space.
We talked a little bit about your time as a Portland fan last time, man. That was surprising. I didn't realize you had made that trip up there and moved up there for that brief period of time. But that's cool that you got to witness a little different flavor there up there in the Portland territory.
Oh, it was so night and day. And that was one of the things that was fun about being a fan back then, is whenever my family and I would go on vacation, it didn't take more than a few vacations being a wrestling fan to see that not every wrestling promotion was the same. Everyone has a different flavor, and I'd always get really excited to see what that flavor was. And the Pacific Northwest was one of the greatest places to be a fan. It was really, that was just such a great territory up until the last few years.
This is Wrestling Nostalgia, the podcast that dives into wrestling history. Hey, wrestling fans, I'm Dave Dynasty, and if you enjoy podcasts that are knowledgeable and history-driven, then Wrestling Nostalgia is for you. With great guests and fun interviews, there are over 200 episodes in our archives. We chat with several first-time guests and often cover topics not discussed on other podcasts. Look up Wrestling Nostalgia on your favorite podcast platform and visit all of our links at linktree/WrestlePod. That is linktr.ee/RASSLEPOD. And remember, wherever you go, whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Rasslin Podcast, where we talk the territories. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Rasslin Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Rasslin Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Rasslin Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron over at Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive watch-along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com, and to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.
So when you were just talking about this feud, you mentioned the manager Pete Collins, and people talk about a lot of managers that have come up and down the pike, even in the southern territories or Tennessee. There's a lot of random managers that come and go, and their names have been batted about on the message boards over the years. Pete Collins is not one that gets mentioned a whole lot, but he was over here in the LA territory. I was wondering if you could share any memories of Pete Collins, any backstory you have on Pete's career, anything about the man.
Yes, Pete Collins was a mainstay in San Bernardino going back to at least the mid-'70s, probably earlier. He was like a piece of San Bernardino, California. I did some research on him. He was a local golf instructor.
Okay.
He took part in a lot of amateur tournaments. He owned a couple of used car lots. And
wow, he should have been perfect for the mic then.
Oh, totally. He was one of these guys who was just really active in the San Bernardino community, was out there, took part in a lot of charity events. And I'm not sure how he got involved in the wrestling scene. Before he was the manager of the Monster, he would usually be a manager of babyface teams. When Gordman and Goliath were babyfaces, he was their manager.
Okay.
And he was a really nice man. I know he's going to go down for getting a prize in the Wrestling Observer as the manager of the Monster, the most disgusting gimmick used in professional wrestling in 1981.
Right.
And
I believe it's the most disgusting promotional tactic, right?
Yes. Worst promotional tactic.
There it is.
But he was a very nice guy. Once a year, he would have all the wrestlers, before the matches on Sunday, he would have all the wrestlers over to his house. He had a really nice house, and would throw a huge bash for him. For them.
And clearly, he has a laboratory in his basement where he created the monster. So.
In fact, when I was getting a couple of years ago, when I was getting all those crypto texts, somebody saying, "Hey, Kurt, have you heard the great news about crypto? Have you heard about this?" And I knew only a few people would get this, but I couldn't resist. I said, "Oh my God, is this the same invention that Pete Collins made in his laboratory in San Bernardino in 1981? And he responded, "Yes, that's the exact one, and I can get you in on the ground floor."
Wow. At least he's played along.
First person I sent that to was Dave Meltzer, and I got a response right back, just LOLing all over the place. So if I could make him laugh, that was a pat on the back.
Absolutely. All right, so you mentioned a name in passing a little bit ago, Pistol Pete Marquez. He was a worker, but I believe he also promoted some, I don't want to say outlaw shows, but some indie shows or whatever over there at some point as well. What are your memories of Pistol Pete?
Pistol Pete was my first trainers were Tom Hankins and Dr. Jerry Graham. Mm-hmm. And then I started training with Pete. Pete was the first person to teach me just the basics of a match, and was the first person to book me on my first show. He was a local boy from Southern California. Would also work for Roy Shire during the last few years of Roy Shire's territory. Pete was a good guy. His matches were okay. When he really wanted to have a good match, he could put on a good match. He wasn't the most motivated guy. But the shows he promoted were pretty decent. In fact, I'd call them indie shows as opposed to outlaw shows, because he still had to go through all the hassles of dealing with the state athletic commission. That's the biggest difference I noticed when the athletic commission started having governance over professional wrestling was if you promoted a wrestling show, you had to be ready to put some money into it. You had to have a ringside doctor there. You had to jump through hoops of the athletic commission. Pete's promotion wasn't the best, but just jumping through those hoops.
Sure.
Yeah, I pat him on the back for that. Absolutely. He also booked for Carl Lauer on Carl Lauer's independent shows.
Okay. All right. Well, there's another guy that pops up here at the beginning of 1980, and he would go on to have a very successful career in various territories, even had a run in the WWF under an assumed name. And I'm talking about Tom Prichard, the future Doctor of Desire. Tom Prichard's here as a young'un. I believe this is his very first push in the wrestling world.
That was his very first territory. He did some indie shows in Texas, but this was his first indie run. I know this was not his idea, but they billed him initially as Cowboy Tom.
Right.
They didn't even put the Prichard on the name at first. And I remember just rolling my eyes like, oh my God, Cowboy Tom, this guy must look like the biggest dork in the world. And then I go to San Bernardino Arena and I see this really cool, this guy who just looks really cool. He looks like a party animal. He's got a cowboy hat on, but that was the only Southwestern attire.
Right. He wore the cowboy hat. That made him a cowboy.
Yeah.
That's all it took, right?
And eventually they started calling him Cowboy Tom Prichard. And I think if I remember correctly, at some point they dropped the cowboy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that was one of Tom Renesto's ideas.
At least you mentally dropped the cowboy from his name anyway. So
he went from a cowboy to a doctor. He should be proud.
Do you recall, now that you mentioned that too, and I don't want to go off topic, I want to come back to Tom here in a minute, but do you recall whereabouts Tom Renesto came in as booker here? Because we've also been covering here on Regional Wrestling 1985 in the Memphis territory, and Jerry Jarrett brings in Tom Renesto as booker there as well. And it's been very confusing. Let me just put it that way. Even for Memphis, very confusing trying to keep up with what the hell's going on there. So Tom and Renesto, by all accounts, was a decent booker back in the day. He booked for Ann Gunkel. They were successful for a while anyway, running against the big bad boys of the NWA. Yeah. Tom Renesto had been around. He was a top heel talent under the hood as one of the Bolos, one of the Assassins. So it wasn't like he didn't know how to get it done. but it just seems like his name pops up a lot as a booker when there's questionable gimmicks and things going on. And so I was just curious, do you know when about he came in here and started booking for LeBell?
My assumption it's early 1980. What I do know is that in 1979, up until late summer, Leo Garibaldi was booking. And I didn't really understand the position of a booker back then when I was a kid. But looking back, you could tell when Leo Garibaldi was booking and somebody else was. There was a little more pizzazz to the shows. Even if the wrestlers weren't top-notch, he knew how to book a show.
Gotcha.
And from what I understand, Pistol Pete said that Chavo was booking the last half of the year of 1979.
Okay.
And I guess they were, well, this is coming from Pistol Pete. He said that attendance was going up and I guess the angles were getting over. And then Chavo was dropped as booker.
Maybe Chavo was looking for
who knows?
a little more money.
Chavo was known for and Chavo was also known for putting himself over a lot. And
yeah,
I mean, tremendous worker, but also had a tremendous ego, so he could have had a disagreement with LeBell. And then I want to say Tom Renesto was the next in line. I didn't really notice Renesto's presence until I want to say April or May of 1980.
Okay.
Yeah, that's when I first started noticing him on TV. One of the first times I saw him on TV, you could tell he had a sense of humor because he was doing an interview with Chic Donovan, and he said, "Mr. Donovan, when you go in the ring with Mando Guerrero next week," and then he suddenly just starts speaking Spanish to Chic Donovan.
Okay.
And goes on for like several sentences. And Donovan just has this look like, what the hell? and then when he's done talking in Spanish, he just puts the microphone in front of Donovan's face, and Donovan just kind of pauses and says, well, I got a big surprise for Mando Guerrero this Friday night.
Very cool. That's awesome. I love your memories, man.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I remember Renesto, I think he was the last booker. In fact, I think he was there for 2 years, one of the longer runs of the bookers throughout the year.
We know he's here for a while because the monsters get to arrive. So, yeah.
The monster and, my dear friend Dan Farron did a podcast about 10 years back, and he interviewed Jeff Walton, and I called in on that interview and chatted, and I asked Jeff Walton, where did the idea of the monster come from? And Jeff Walton fessed up and said, that was my idea.
Oh,
I was a big Universal horror fan. And I do want to say, while at the time I thought the monster gimmick was the stupidest thing on the face of the earth, when I look back, I thought it was totally bitchin'. We need more Frankensteins in the ring.
We need shit like that. No wonder they both pop up over there in Memphis in '85. Walton and Renesto.
Exactly. They were very close friends. Yeah, Jeff Walton to this day will talk very fondly of Tom Renesto.
Okay.
I remember the wrestler's opinion of Renesto back then was not very high, but again, he was the booker, and very often the booker is going to be the bad guy. Mickey Doyle always said Renesto was very good to him. Doyle had a lot of respect for him, but he did say that a lot of the guys would talk shit about Renesto. I'd be curious years later to know if they feel the same way, because I know we all get older, and sometimes we look back and, that guy was an asshole, but other times, you kind of see them through a different lens as you get older, and as you get older and things are a little more endearing than they used to be.
It's that maturation process,
Exactly.
Now I see where you're coming from. I'm not 20 anymore.
Yes. At the age of 62, I miss certain things about youth, but I don't want to do it all over again. I don't like the smart ass I was back then. I don't think I was a bad person, but I like being who I am now a lot more than I was even 20 years ago.
I got you. That's fair.
Yeah, a lot of stuff sucks about growing up. I'm not going to lie.
Right.
You lose more people, and it really, really sucks. The bad part sucks. but I still wouldn't trade it for going back and doing it all over.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind to have my my knees from 20 years ago. I'll tell you that.
I would like my metabolism back.
Yeah, well,
I would like to be able
with you there
to eat
too.
a whole pizza.
Yeah, the good old days, man. That's what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
I don't want to pass on Tom Prichard so quickly, though. I just thought of Tom Renesto there. We were talking about another Tom, and I didn't want to forget about that either. So I do want to go back to Tom Prichard, and I wanted to ask your take here watching Tom early in his career here. Now, there's some guys that are just, well, they coined the term drizzling shits, and they never seem to really evolve. And just based on your youthful fanism, if that's a word, here watching Tom in the ring, all the way try to remember back to this era, 1980, did Tom walk right in? And I know he was still very green to the business, but did he walk in and seem to have it? I'm not saying main event caliber guy right out of the gate, but did he seem to understand all of the fundamentals best you could tell when he first got there?
Oh, hell yeah. He was not the drizzling shits. He was a fountain of talent. I mean, he improved greatly over the years, but my God, he was good right out of the starting gate.
Awesome.
He was one of those guys who, before I knew his story, I had a feeling he was probably a fan because he seemed to understand the art of being a babyface. Because there are some guys who they play the babyface, but you sit there saying, have they watched much wrestling? Do they know what a hot tag is? Do they know how to do a fiery comeback? Boy, Prichard was on it right away. I haven't watched any of the stuff from back then, but it would be fun to watch it, from then versus now. I remember when he was in Portland just, I think, 3 years later, I thought, damn, he's like one of the best baby faces I ever saw. And of course, a lot of great baby faces go on to be great heels. The only problem is the business, the way it was back then, needed more Ricky Steamboats and less people who evolved into heels. My fanboy observation anyways.
I was broken as a kid, right? So I liked some of the cool heels. I liked the Mr. Perfects and the guys like that. So I do agree with you. There's an art to being the type, the A-type baby face like a Ricky Steamboat as well.
Absolutely. I remember when I first started training to wrestle and I'd talk to guys like Ed Moretti, and that was when I was through the viewpoint, everybody eventually wants to be a heel. They want to be the bad guy, the cool heel. And then Moretti was marveling over some work that Rick Martel was doing. And I'm thinking, well, you're a heel. And Moretti was saying, but Moretti just told me, yeah, but there's an art to being a babyface, and Rick Martel is a master of that art. I remember one of the things missing from the equation in Portland, and it wasn't a big miss, but when I went there weren't a lot of strong baby faces. The heels were like Rick, Oliver, Buddy Rose, the Destroyer, Fidel Fiera, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the baby faces were good, but they could have used, they didn't have a Lonnie Main. They didn't have a Dutch Savage.
Right.
They had Jay Youngblood, who was a good babyface. And I got to say, the feud he had with Buddy Rose when I was there went a long time and never stopped drawing.
Mm-hmm.
But just when you're looking at it, you're saying, man, you need somebody on the babyface mic here that can kind of spice things up a bit.
No, I get you.
Bob Boyd was an exception. Jonathan Boyd was a great babyface. A gnarly, nasty, cursing babyface.
It's kind of funny, it's you talked about Rick Martel, the ultimate babyface type guy who knows how to go out there and get it done. And it's kind of funny, the story goes, Martel leaves the WWF in '88 to go be with his wife, who was, I believe, ill at the time. But Vince wanted him back, and Martel said, if I come back, I want to be a heel. And Vince tells him, you can't be a heel. And basically, he can't turn down the talent of Rick Martel. So he gives in. He's like, all right, we're going to make you a heel and see how this goes. And of course, the model eventually is born, but he's heel Rick Martel first. And I loved heel Rick Martel. He was, I enjoyed that character.
Oh, he was great. He was great. It makes me wonder, because I don't think I've talked to many wrestlers one-on-one about it, but it seems like a lot of wrestlers are like grown-up kids who I want to be the cowboy, not the Indian. I want to play this role. It seems like they really want to be heels sometimes.
Well, you spend your entire career as a babyface like Rick Martel did up until that point, and I kind of get it. Like, can I just try something? I know I can do this. Let me show you.
Oh, yeah.
And it worked, I just thought it was funny. The story is Vince tells Rick Martel, you can't be a heel, but meanwhile, in the same month, he tells the Bushwhackers, you're going to be babyfaces. And and the story goes there.
And
Butch
the Bushwhackers.
Right.
If you saw the Bushwhackers in other places, you'd say baby faces, all that blood and guts and gnarliness.
Yes. And that's so funny. Vince saw that immediately. That's what he wanted to do with them. And the story goes, Butch stands up in the office, leans over the desk into Vince's faces and points to his, his mug. And he goes, if you can make this a baby face, mate, then you go ahead and do it, and he did it. Even as a kid, I never really latched into the Bushwhacker deal, but I can't say that it didn't get over and it didn't work.
Well, one of the things I noticed in territories was if you're a really good heel, I think eventually it makes sense to turn you babyface because Lonnie Main was a heel in Portland, the heel in Portland.
Yeah.
And what I remember down here where there were heels, like this is a later example because I didn't go to many live events up until 1979, but Leroy Brown was the heel here. And, he wasn't the greatest worker in the world, but the fans dug him. A lot of fans booed him, but more fans kept liking him. And eventually, what do? You got to turn him heel eventually.
Right. Yeah.
And same thing with Lonnie Main in Roy Shire's territory. How can you hate Moondog Main for too many years, no matter how nasty he is?
Yeah.
So the great thing is he's the crazy baby face, and you still love him because he's not this baby face who's going to come and wrestle clean. He's going to mess up the hair of the heel or blow snot on them or do something really nasty that baby faces don't do. But you're sticking it to the heel. And I kind of assume that's why they turned Tolis baby face here about a year after his feud with Blassie. And Tolis, I remember reading an interview where he said it didn't get over at all, so they turned him heel back. But Rock Rims can correct me if I'm wrong. I think I read a result where Ernie Ladd injured John Tolis by, giving him the taped thumb to the throat, and Tolis spits up blood. And I think it was a sellout crowd, and they had trouble calming down the crowd. Like, they had trouble getting both wrestlers out of there because they wanted to kick Ernie Ladd's ass.
All right.
And if Rock's listening, please tell me if I'm remembering correctly, if I heard it from another source. But I remember Tolis was that same kind of baby face. He was a very stoic, but kind of nasty baby face.
Yeah.
So while all the other good baby faces are trying to, follow the rules and be good boys, he is kind of a catharsis for all them. Well, I'm going to come in and just kick a little ass on these bullies.
Right. And that would work. A lot of those guys were able to do that, parlay their long heel run like a crusher or a bruiser into those baby face runs. Yeah, Duthy Rhodes, baby. All of those guys, absolutely.
Totally.
All right, so let's see what else we got on tap here. I'm still looking through the January cards. I see some names popping up. We covered a lot of these guys. I see another masked character by the name of The Whip. All I could find on this guy, and if this is accurate or not, I'm not even sure. He also wrestled under the name Cool Cat Clark on the West Coast. I can only find results out of him between 77 and 80, so either he wasn't in the business long or he was off the radar. I'm not really sure. Do you remember anything about The Whip?
Yeah, I think he was the same guy as Cool Cat Clark. Okay. I can't remember positively because I only saw him a handful of times, but okay, Cool Cat Clark came in here early in 1977 and did jobs for a couple of weeks. However, he was a local African American who was, big on the lucha scene here.
Oh, okay.
And if you talk to Superboy will tell you that was one of his heroes. This stuff that he did in LeBell, he wasn't able to show his true talent. They said he was an amazing wrestler, really good flyer, and Superboy was raving about his cartwheels, saying, I know it's just cartwheels, but when you saw that guy do a cartwheel, you looked like you were watching kung fu in action. And his is a very sad story. In 80 or 81, he was in a liquor store and there was a drive-by shooting and a stray bullet paralyzed him.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't know that until I went to one of the lucha shows with my friend Lloyd at Hadco Plaza, and we're looking. My Spanish was real. My Spanish still isn't good, but it was even worse then. We're looking at the program and we see something in Spanish about a tribute to Cruel Clark. And my friend Lloyd said, "Oh, I think I heard he was paralyzed." And halfway through the show, Superboy's father, El Moro, came out pushing him in a wheelchair. And that was really hard to see, especially if you saw how athletic and just how good he looked when he was younger. I mean, the paralysis we could tell was in the face too. It wasn't just the lower extremities of the body.
That's terrible. That would explain why he falls off the results around that time too then.
Yes. And a lot of the local boys kept in touch with him, and then just one day, I guess they went to see him, and he and some family had moved away. So we don't know what became of him.
Gotcha.
But the local lucha guys had a lot of respect for him. I would love to, in fact, I should interview some of them because I'd just love to know more about him too. There was a write-up in one of the Lucha Libre mags on him.
Wow. Well, I appreciate you uncovering all of these random names from years gone by and giving them, doing them a little justice here on the program and getting to talk about some of these guys, because you don't hear these names brought up.
And I would like to confirm if he was the Whip or not, because I know I saw the Whip when he was under a hood, and I'm the last person you asked to say who's that under the hood, because I'm an idiot when it comes to identifying a face. You could say, "Hey, look, there's Bruiser Brody." I'm going, "Oh yeah, that is him." No, Kurt, that's the Twin Devil, you idiot. You know, so you can fool me on facial recognition easily. My dad had the same thing.
I could only go off of wrestling data and cage match and things of those nature is what I'm basically going off of in regards to looking up some of the identities of these masked guys, because you go on the old message boards and they're throwing every name in the world out there.
Wrestling data is a really good one to look, but you have to kind of like look over your shoulder every now and then.
Yeah.
Like one example is there was two different wrestlers who used the name Joaquin Murrieta in California in the 1930s. One was from Mexico, and another was Bobby Pico, who was the father of Marie Laverne and Bobby Pico, a grandfather of Steve Nelson. But they get them mixed up in wrestling data, and there's a couple of other guys who have overlapping gimmicks. I think the same might be with Bengali, because Bengali wrestled under the name El Azteca, and that same gimmick was used by Gil Ariano, who ran Gil's gym for years. So you'll see results where people will say somebody beat El Azteca, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes it is Bengali, other times it was Gil.
I've also known some of the more obscure names and things of that nature where somebody may have used it in the 30s and then somebody used it in the 80s and they kind of lump it all together. So I get it. It's going to take time to weed that stuff out. So you're right. You do got to kind of keep an eye on things. If you're really a great researcher, historian, things of that nature, you're definitely going to have to do your due diligence on top of just looking at it. But best I could tell, that was what I came up with anyway in regards to the Whip.
If you approach it like that, wrestling data is invaluable. It's a really great tool.
Yeah,
but I would love to. I will have to ask some of the older guys about Charles Clark. He was only around for maybe 5-6 years, but he deserves some recognition.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you talking about him here on the show, because you opened my eyes a little bit to his career. Here in January, they're not doing great business, it doesn't appear. Imagine that. And the cards don't really look all that impressive until randomly we get a couple of back-to-back shows featuring Andre the Giant coming to town. I hope he got paid.
I think he won the Battle Royal that year, didn't he?
I think he does again in 80, 81, somewhere around there. I know he wins one of the last Battle Royals. Here we got Andre and Mando Guerrero defeating the Twin Devils 1 week. The following week, Andre's going to stay in town to challenge Harley Race to the NWA World Heavyweight. So these guys are paying Harley Race and Andre the Giant here. Would you say that even though we're light on the talent right now, that a Harley Race Andre match, and I know that sounds silly asking this question, but would that have even been enough to draw here, or was LA just done by this point?
No, they would still draw good shows.
Okay.
Like, there were several times Backlund came in 1980, and from I wasn't at any of them, but from what I understand, they drew well. If you brought enough wrestlers from Mexico in, even if Mil Mosqueras wasn't on the show, if you brought like the Brazos or the Villanos, the attendance wouldn't sell out, but it would definitely go up. And they'd never learned their lesson of bringing more Mexicans in. They still kind of wanted to say, oh, let's have like the Guerreros represent the Mexican fans, where Paul Bosch used a lot of wrestlers from Mexico, El Halcon, Psicodelico, all of them. He understood that, this draws. So there were always bright spots. Even in that last year, 1982, they had several cards that you could call super shows. One where the Brazos and the Villanos wrestled this bloodbath that was sweet. And
that sounds amazing, just being able to watch
people
that.
like Kuniaki Kobayashi.
Right, Kid Kobe.
So even when it was dying, there were bright spots. The Harley Race versus Andre the Giant, I didn't see the Olympic Auditorium match, but I did see their match in San Bernardino. And that drew San Bernardino was a matchbook arena. I think it seated 1,500 people, but it was pretty packed that night.
Spoiler
to me, there's
alert.
nothing like being in a small arena that is packed to the gills and people just going ballistic, because Andre was so over. And
oh my God. I can only imagine getting to see the world title on the line, Harley Race and Andre the Giant in San Bernardino. It wasn't, I'm not, no offense to the smaller towns or the smaller venues, but here they are in the Olympic Auditorium. That makes sense. But to be able to bring that around the loop, man, that's pretty phenomenal.
Yes. And even then, when I knew zilch about the business pretty much, I was sitting here saying, I'm 17 and I'm taking photos of Andre the Giant versus Harley Race. How bitchin' is this?
No kidding. Yeah.
And there's something about it being in San Bernardino that made it even more endearing. I mean, I was always a sucker for those matchbook arenas. I'd take them over the Olympic Auditorium or Madison Square Garden any day. I like small places with a big rowdy crowd.
Another name that pops up on this card here with Harley and Andre at the Olympic Auditorium, I'm not sure if he's just now making his return once again to the territory or not, but it caught my eye. Victor Rivera, who had some long, big runs here on the West Coast and in New York once upon a time. Now, he had seen better days in the ring by this point in his career, but what are your memories of Victor Rivera?
Well, as far as 1980 goes, I know he was here, but I have to feign memory lapse. I don't remember him being a huge presence here. I remember him turning heel in 1977 and playing that role off and on throughout 1979. I remember in 1981, that was when I was living in Oregon, I know he turned babyface to renew his feud with Tolis. And I mean, as great as both he and Tolis were, it just didn't have the magic of the feud that they had 8 years earlier.
Right. He had, I guess he would have turned heel in LA before he came back to the WWF and did the heel run there as well. I think he came back there maybe 78 or something like that. I could be wrong. I could be off by a year. But
in fact, I just happened to be in 78. I just happened to be visiting my sister in New Jersey, and I just happened to turn on wrestling when Victor Rivera made his very first appearance as a heel. And that was pretty sweet to watch, because I think he went in with Blassie, beats SD Jones, and then just cuts a promo in Spanish, and I just remember the place just going ballistic on him. He was a good heel. I mean, actually, it was impressive how he got over as a face, because he looked like such a gnarly guy. He just looked like a tough dude. He didn't have a natural baby face look to me, but he did both beautifully.
Well, everybody has a prime. Unfortunately, some of these guys' primes were pre-VCR, so a lot of their best work isn't out there.
Yeah, that's a shame. One guy who came in, another sign that I think LA was kind of starting to dwindle is, I think it was March or April, they brought in Pampero Firpo as a heel. Now, he had been here in the 70s as a babyface feuding with the Chic, and Firpo was a heel, say, in the 60s. Yeah, you could buy that. this short,
hairy
but powerful
monster
looking
yes.
dude. Yeah. And in the 80s, though, I mean, he was still good, but he would have been better suited as a babyface. He didn't look as threatening. His legs weren't as pumped up as they were. He did look older, but I think it would have been kind of cool as a crazy babyface. He was still fun to watch. I still enjoyed it watching him, but yeah, you kind of tell that they were kind of turning the corner and, okay, who do we bring in as a heel? Who's willing to work for this kind of money? I heard the payoffs weren't the worst, but
okay,
people who were used to working other territories would take one look at LA and say, okay, I'm out of here.
kind of like the Skip Young situation later on. I get you.
Yeah, I remember the first time wrestlers actually would talk smart to me, and I don't know why. The first wrestler who ever did was Buzz Sawyer up in Oregon. I was interviewing for one of the Kaiser mags, and he just totally was talking about, who has the book in Los Angeles and what kind of payoffs do they have? And I can't remember what I said to him, but I told him what somebody got as a payoff for San Bernardino, and he just had this nauseated look like, well, that's the last place I'm going. and sure enough, later that year, about a year later, I remember Joe Lightfoot, who was tag teaming with Jay Youngblood in the Northwest, he came to LA and he was gone in 2 weeks. A friend of mine actually saw him, back by the dressing room watching the other matches and just shaking his head like, what the hell?
Wow, okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm scrolling through the result. Oh, by the way, anybody that was worried or concerned or curious, spoiler alert, Andre the Giant did not win the NWA World Heavyweight title. So Harley Race retained.
I'm glad you told me because I forgot.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure everybody knew. As we scroll through...
Another person I want to mention,
yeah,
and he got a push that same year under two different personalities, two different gimmicks, was Apollo Jalisco, who is a local boy named Adolfo Plasencia. He and his brother were a tag team who had a good run in Mexico in the late 70s. They were trained here in LA. Apollo Jalisco usually would wrestle under the name just Jalisco. That's where he's from. But he came in here as Apollo Jalisco, was over as a babyface for a few months. Then they started jobbing him out. And then he returned as El Medico with a full bodysuit and a mask. But just like Mickey Doyle as Piel Blanco, the moment he got in the ring, people are going, oh, hey, that's Apollo Jalisco.
Yeah, I think I've seen footage of both versions. I know I've seen the Medico stuff, and I believe Apollo Jalisco too, the footage that's out there. And so that's kind of interesting. I remember wondering who the hell is El Medico, and I probably went and looked it up when I was watching the footage. I just completely forgot, but he is absolutely one of the names that I have highlighted here. So I was going to ask you about him, so I can check that one off the box.
Oh, he's somebody he still lives locally here. He is still in. I think he's a few years older than I am. He is in phenomenal shape.
Awesome.
One of those fountains of youth. He was a really good worker. In fact, when I was just kind of surfing the other night to look for some 1980 matches, I found a short clip of him wrestling Goliath under the El Medico gimmick. And that was really fun because you get to see a match with Goliath and another wrestler wrestling straight Mexican style.
Right.
I hope I can find more like that. Goliath is somebody we were so lucky to have in California. I mean, not only was he just a great presence here, but he trained a lot of people. And one of the most important things was him training Jesse Hernandez, who was a wrestler, but is known more for being a trainer and promoter.
Right.
And more often than not, if I'm at a wrestling show and I watch a tag team, if I say, okay, that tag team there was trained by Jesse because this tag team reminds me of Gordman Goliath. So Goliath was an excellent wrestling teacher, excellent wrestler, and in turn, Jesse Hernandez is an excellent trainer. Yeah, I wish I was better in just putting into words the importance of having Goliath be here in California till the last few years of his life, actually.
Yeah, no, I mean, unfortunately, that's another team, the Gordman and Goliath tag team that, again, a lot of, most of their best stuff is unfortunately lost to time. But, all the stories you hear and everything that is out there, you can see even in his waning days in the ring, Goliath and Gordman, obviously, you could see that even though they couldn't do maybe everything that once upon a time they could do, they understood what they could still do, if that makes sense. And they were really good at it.
They still understood how they could get over.
Yes.
They couldn't be quite the workhorse they were 5 years earlier, but they still know how to get over.
Right.
They were
Absolutely.
phenomenal. In fact, there's a portion in, again, bringing up Rock Grimm's book on the LA territory, Legends and Icons. He has a quote from Art Williams saying that when Andre the Giant came to LA, he often requested that he get some matches with Gordman and Goliath because he said they just knew how to put him over perfectly, especially in like a handicap match. And you can see that. I'm sure almost everybody's seen that match from the Olympic Auditorium where Andre's wrestling Gordman and Goliath, I believe, from 1974. So it's cool that that's there, but that wasn't lost on Andre. He actually requested their presence.
Well, that's very cool. That's very commendable. And at the same time that, that makes you feel pretty good. If you're Gordman and Goliath, okay, this guy wants to work with us. So, he knows that. Yeah. It says a lot, in regards to that. And Andre could be picky if he wanted to be in the position he was in. So that definitely says a lot.
There's a match from Texas that I watched. I think it's about there's a few matches of Gordman and Goliath from Japan, late 70s, that aren't the best display of they knew their role. They were getting squashed by Inoki and Sakaguchi.
Right.
But there's a match from Texas that you can find on YouTube where they're wrestling, I believe it's Omar Atlas and Buddy Moreno. And I encourage anybody to watch that because that's a good display of what workhorses they were. Everything from them double teaming to just working as heels. And when you see them bumping for the baby faces, you could just tell these are people who were just trained so excellently. And I mean, these guys were workhorses.
Right.
They were it. I could probably put it better in writing than I could verbally.
No, well,
I kind of stumble over words verbally, but Gordman and Goliath were special.
Sometimes it's hard to explain something that's a visual, and wrestling can definitely be a visual.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm scrolling through these results here in February, and there's a lot of talent coming in and out. Carlos Mata comes through here. The Funks are going to make an appearance here to put over Chief Running Hill and Al Madril as the Los Angeles version of the World Tag Team Champions. I see Dr. Hiro Ota, who also worked as Yasu Fuji. He even worked as Colonel Yankee for the Bob Roop and company that split away from Ron Fuller, of course, would have played a Japanese wrestler named Yankee in Knoxville.
I like that.
Go
I
figure.
never knew that he used that. I never knew he used that handle.
That's Yanky, Yankee. Guys.
I love it. I love it.
But there was a Pampero Firpo, who we'll get to on the next episode. But there's a couple other names I want to run by you here before we close up this week. One of them, and I don't know if you have anything on him, but I did see a couple of matches, so he's just another guy that sticks out to me because I said, I'd like to know more about this guy. A fellow by the name of Arias Romero. And also, there was legendary talent, once upon a time, south of the border, Enrique Llanes. And here, for just about a month, there is a guy who comes in here under the name Enrique Llanes Jr., and I go to Google him, and I can't find anything on him outside of that he worked in L.A. for a month, so I'm thinking maybe not even actually related to the original. I'm not sure.
I remember hearing that Enrique Llanes was, I should know this, I should know this because this is some lucha history, but, the Llanes family is related to the Guerrero family.
Right.
I remember, you know what? I think there was a son named Javier Llanes who came here, and maybe they did just call him Enrique Llanes Jr.
Gotcha.
I might be totally wrong. I remember one of the Llanes family, like a younger wrestler coming in, but just kind of for a few shots.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so sorry, who's the other gentleman you mentioned?
Oh, I'm sorry, Arias Romero.
Oh, he was great. It's so funny. If you watch him in those LA tapes, you see a decent wrestler who's still green, babyface. Look at him later in the 80s, and in Mexico, you see one of the most natural heels you have ever seen. He did a lot of work with Conan when Conan was young. In fact, Conan introduced him to me when Romero and Black Gordman were teaming together for Red Bastien's Wind tapings in San Bernardino in '89. And it's so funny because he looks like this shy baby face in those LA matches if you see them on YouTube.
Right.
But just fast forward a few years later, he was this loudmouth, wisecracking heel. And on the Monterey TV, I remember there were some tapes where he was feuding. It was him and Rocky Star, I think, feuding with Eddie Guerrero. And they did a segment where they're showing clips of he and the other heels, Pearl Harboring Eddie Guerrero from behind all over the place. And that's the backdrop. But what you're watching is Arias Romero with his guitar, and he's singing like a folk song about how he likes to beat the shit out of Eddie Guerrero all the time.
So that's where The Rock got it from. Okay. So.
Yeah, exactly. Romero was good. I actually ran into him about a year before he passed away at Cauliflower Alley. It had been the first time I'd seen him in, over 10 years. And he looked fine, but he passed away from cancer about a year later. He was a good worker.
Yeah, it's like I said, I've only footage I've actually really, I got to go look up some of this Lucha stuff if I can find it because, most of what I've seen of him just is the bits and pieces of the LA stuff that's out there. But again, he was just somebody that caught my eye like he should have been something more. So you're telling me he was a whole lot more, and I'm looking forward to Googling and searching and trying to find me some of that footage because it sounds like a fun time to be had.
Yeah. I don't know his whole story. It seems just from memory. I saw him a lot, like when he was in Tijuana. When I went to the Tijuana matches, he was frequently there. He wrestled a lot around the Monterey area, so I don't know if he's one of these guys who like to stick close to home.
Gotcha.
I think he lived in the Monterey area. I think he has a son who's involved in the business somehow.
Oh.
But he was really talented.
Well, I am scrolling through the list of names that we have yet to cover here in 1980. Names like Battleship Johnson. Of course, John Toll is going to come back once. Oh dear, Battleship, huh? Oh, John Toll
Johnson.
We're going to save him for the next episode, but I appreciate you building him up like that. 'Cause now everybody's going to be tuning back in just for the Battleship Johnson stories coming from Vandal. I can't wait for that. But
we'll talk about Battleship Johnson. Seemed like a nice enough guy, but
one of those, huh?
As far as box office appeal, yeah, but worth talking about.
Can't wait. So John Tolis, Pampero Firpo, Mil Mascaras coming through, Dos Caras, Butcher Brannigan. There's so many names I'm scrolling through here.
Demon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Demon.
Yeah, man. Wow. Yeah. 5-star classic superstars also coming to town, like Enforcer Luciano and Walter Johnson.
Oh, dear. I think Luciano was there at the same time that Walter Johnson was there.
Ooh.
That should have been the sign that something was wrong.
Wow, okay. Can't wait till we get to...
In fact, I wonder, we'll talk about this more next episode, but
sure.
I wonder if there's any matches of Walter Johnson versus Enforcer Luciano. I would like to see that just to see what do they do.
Well, I got to go Google and see if I can find if any of that footage exists. And in the meantime, I'm also going to scroll back through the results to cross-reference and see if we can find any of the matches if they went down here in the results we have for the Olympic Auditorium. And so, man, we got a lot to look. I mean, we are just getting started, really, Vandal. I mean, we're still in 1980. We've got a lot of talent.
Oh, I'm loving it. I could go forever. So, we'll continue on.
I love it, man. I had a blast again. I was looking forward to doing this, and it made my night to be able to do this.
Thank you.
Got some sick kids in the house here, and so I put them to bed, and I got to spend a couple hours with you here, man. I just really appreciate you taking the time out and doing this again, and I'm looking forward to the next time around.
I am looking forward, and thank you for having me on again. And I apologize for my stammering and my awkward method of speaking. I'm working on it. I swear.
I'm just going to do my my Lance Russell here and say, come on, Vandal. You were fine out there. So we'll continue this story, guys. Lots of great talent to get into, and maybe some not so great talent as well. And that's what's going to make it fun, right? So we got to have a little bit of both.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. If you can't say something nice about somebody, then just talk shit about them loud as you can.
Thank you. That's what this is all about. At the end of the day, if you guys thought this was going to be top-notch wrestling from beginning to end, then why would it be the dying days of the Los Angeles territory, right? So we'll get into all of these talents and a whole lot more next time around. Thank you once again, Vandal, for being here.
And thank you for having me.